But the reason I came back, the main reason was both Bob Iger and Josh Tomorrow, who's the chairman of the Parks and Resorts, just said the Imagineering culture was severely wounded, and was sort of what used to be this bonfire of creativity was like smoldering embers. That was the call to action, was like, come back and rekindle the flame. So that, I said, okay, that sounds like something I want to do. I feel passion for that organization. It treated me very well, obviously, and I believe in it. It's a very unique, as you know, creative organization in the world. To hear that it was sort of fading off was just heartbreaking. So that's, and then 7 months in, fortunately, like I said, it's like seen in a movie where there's a little burning ember and you start fanning it. It comes back pretty quickly if it feels that, it's like an animal, like a puppy.
Bruce, so nice to see you.
Good to see you.
How long have we known each other?
So I was 20, gosh, how old was I? I was probably 23 or 24, and I'm going to be 58 in about 2 months. So
400 years.
Someone has to do the math on that, not me.
Exactly.
Not my strong suit.
Well, you look exactly the same, give or take, so it's it.
Fortunately, eyes deteriorate over the years.
Exactly. I generally credit myself from saving you from a life as a lawyer.
You did, actually. You saved me from quite a few things. Yeah, it was very random, actually, in many ways. Because should I tell the story? I mean, it was sort of very interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah. So my dad was a lawyer. I grew up in Sag Harbor.
And therefore, it was destined.
It was sort of destined only from the fact that, when you grew up at those days, Sag Harbor was not, as you know, what it is. The Hamptons, weren't what they are now. So I was the local. And, we went to about 3 movies in my entire childhood.
Well, and Sag Harbor was a fishing town.
It was very much so.
And
it was actually a hard town.
I think it was then famous for having the largest number of bars per capita of any town in New York or the world.
And my cousin was one of the deputies. There was a deputy and a sheriff. There was 2 deputies. And I think there was more bar fights.
This was apparently, quite the thing. It was a rough town.
It was a rough town, not at all what it is today, and was very interesting. So today you would say if you had a dream of entertainment, it would be the most natural place. I mean, you had the same sort of story. Yeah. You sort of broke out there. And for me, I just when I went and saw Star Wars, I was around 12-ish. My dad did cave and let us see that. And it blew my mind.
Weak moment.
A weak moment.
Exactly.
But for me, it was
transformational.
That was a transformational moment, and because all my friends wanted to be, Luke Skywalker or Darth Vader, depending on their good or bad side. I just wanted to read about George Lucas, and I found American Cinematographer, and I started reading about George Lucas. I was like, who does this shit? And but there was no path. My family was all lawyers. So I did liberal arts school.
Unless you wanted to sue someone in the entertainment industry.
Well, that was the path. I thought I'll be an entertainment lawyer, and I'm really glad I didn't go down that path now that I see what it is. But it was so fascinating, and I was cleaning pools because that's what one does in the summer. But I had taken a year off between undergrad and grad because I was going to go into advertising, and that sucked. So I thought, well, I'll go to law school. Got a scholarship into Chicago, but I had a year to kill because I had lost time. Winter was coming. Pools aren't open in the winter. And one of my dad's clients, Bob Francis, worked for you. And the most random moment, I was just sitting at home saying, well, I got to find a job for the winter. I guess I'll, see what restaurants open. Because remember then, the restaurants all closed.
Sure.
And he said,
people don't understand how seasonal that area was.
Oh, God,
I mean, the population went up by a factor of what, 5 probably.
Yeah, we went 5,000 to 25,000, no problem.
Exactly,
yeah.
and everyone went home.
Totally.
I mean, the stores closed, everything, and it was just, kind of like Siberia in the wintertime.
Hence all the bars.
Exactly. But you can see why they were popular. There's nothing else to do.
Nothing else to do. But you know, when he said, you know, Bob Francis said, you know, come tour the place because this guy Bran Ferren is, you had just gotten the deal for Star Trek V, and he said they're making movies. My dad knew I was interested in movies, but thought I was going to law school. And I literally went what I thought was a tour of a facility. And at one point, Jim Shelley, who was, you know, your general manager, as the best I could describe it, I thought he was the nicest man. He spent 40 minutes with me just asking about my life. I thought it was just a nice gesture. 2 weeks later, he calls me and says, "You're hired." I said, "For what?" I don't know if you know this part, because I showed up in a coat and tie. I didn't know what the hell I was hired for. And
That's all right, neither did we.
And Chester put me on a forklift.
Well, you know,
Chester Hartwell.
exactly. Well, you know, that was the time when any moving body who could do something, we had work.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
If I remember right, you had to ramp up like 100 and some odd people.
yeah, and it was challenging. It was a little bittersweet because I'd been working at the same time. I don't think you were involved in this, but with Jim Cameron when he was doing Planning for the Abyss.
No.
And we're going to be working on the Abyss, but couldn't do both.
Right.
You know, could barely do one.
Yeah. So I was like, I think I was the lowest person on the totem pole for a while, you know, but I worked with Phil Gajewski, who was your cameraman sort of extraordinaire there, and Chester, and Alan Webb, who, you know, was just like, I don't know what Alan did, but he was just funny. I guess he did everything, projection. And my first lesson there was your spirit actually taught me a lot, which was I just got this vibe of like, you know, I always say you had to just do it before Nike, because you really were exuding this attitude of like, well, why do people think so much? Just, if you think you want to do it, just fucking do it. And, you know, I was like, okay, well, then I'm going to stay late. And I told Phil, let me learn the cameras, let me learn the projection. And, you know, I was mostly working for Susan LeBaire, the purchasing agent, for driving a truck back and forth to New York and then Hoboken when we had the crazy shit going in Hoboken. But because I had worked at nights, hanging out with Phil, learning all the equipment, if you remember in Star Trek, there was that moment when there was some sandstorm out here and he had to go away, and you just came and said, well, I understand you're the one person who knows how to use the cameras other than Phil. You want to be a cameraman? Like that.
Well, and that's, you know, my attitude is, look, we're all in this. Who can do what? And, you know, how do we do it? And in a situation like that, there's a lot going on. I mean, Hoboken is where we set up the stage with Peter Wallach and his crew doing motion control work. And so, you know, we had multiple crews sort of scattered, and we had a crew at the optical house doing the optical effects and matte compositing and all of that. And so, you know, you're on a project like that, which for a feature had a very low budget and a ridiculously short schedule, you know, logic would dictate, don't take the project because there isn't enough money and there isn't enough time. And of course, you never even think about that, because it's, of course we're going to do it, you know, and we'll just make it work. And so everybody does what they need. But I think that, you know, so often people spend a lot of their energy talking themselves out of doing things.
Completely.
And if I had to put value on what it takes to be successful in these kind of businesses, it's having a positive attitude, being optimistic, being enthusiastic, and understanding if plan A doesn't work, there's plan C, D, E, F, G, you know, you just keep working your way. And you always want to have in the back of your mind, well, what's the stretch goal we're going for? But if that doesn't work, okay, what am I going to do to be able to deliver this anyway? And, you know, sometimes it goes great and you love the work product. Now, I can honestly say I've never been happy with anything I've ever done. You know, and it always could have been better and always could have been this. And, you know, I'm always my harshest critic. And you say, you know, that was okay, but it's that. And I think you just have to have that attitude that you're there to keep making things better. But, you know, it's possible to aim low and miss. And when I see people who are self-censoring themselves, I can't do this, I'll never do this, I won't get into there, I don't know, you know, they're their own worst enemies, because they never even get up to the point to try.
Like I think the liberal arts education taught me how to think. And that's really all I gave you, because you don't leave with anything else. But it did teach me how to think, you know, philosophy and literature. And
which is important.
And then you go out in the world, and then you find people that you can sort of learn from and take the lessons. And I do think it's incumbent upon the mentee to sort of take the good and ignore what doesn't work for you from every mentor. But it's, I mean, I learned a ton. I will say those years at Assistant Ferren were literally the most formative for me as far as what allowed me to do what I've been doing since.
What are highlight projects from those days that you were involved in that really stuck with you?
Well, the Star Trek V, absolutely, because that was that was almost in the course of 1 year, a mere 12 months, I went from a lowly truck driver to, literally like cleaning toilets and shit to breaking up boxes to being on the set, helping design special
Hollywood
effects.
Movie,
yeah, and a major, getting my name on the thing, and we had to sit there forever to see it, but we did.
Yeah, exactly. It's worth waiting for.
It's true. I brought my grandmother. You'll love the story. And she said, the last movie I ever came to was The Bridge over River Kwai, The Bridge over River Kwai. And I was like, oh my God, this has been a while. But so that was one of those. It's like, well, you know what? Why just dream? Just go do. And you always said that. You're sort of like, you always said to me, align your passion with how you make money, because why do anything else? It's sort of like, you were like almost like there's no hobbies. Why have hobbies?
And, and I frankly think that if you're going to be great at something, you better have passion for it, because otherwise it's too much work.
Yeah.
It's just too hard if you're not enjoying every moment of it.
Completely.
And I've always thought about the projects that you work on. If you weren't being paid to work on them, you'd have another job to make the money to be able to work on them.
Yeah.
It's that, and but I think for me the interesting part is you learn different things from each of those fields. Mm-hmm. I mean, you learn from live theater what it means to be exactly right every time, and this has to work. And we worked in Broadway theater, we worked in the rock and roll touring business, where if you have 80,000 people in an arena and the projection doesn't work or something else, you've got a big problem.
It's a big problem, especially with film.
Well, exactly. And back in those days, the only way to get the image brightness and resolution was film. And so, it's changed a lot. But it was, we, as you recall, had to design and invent our own lenses because there were no wide enough lenses to do that. We had to learn how to package equipment so it could survive life on the road, which is non-trivial.
Nope.
And so, but those rich learning experiences are to me what makes it all worthwhile. And then when you see an audience smile or someone react or them jump or they do other stuff, that's the payoff that all those things went together, as well as what did you learn from theater that you can bring to film? What did you learn from robotics that you can bring to this? That was for me always the fun part of the company. And the company now is how do you take from the creative art and design side, the science and engineering side, and then the live performance side versus what are the rigors of production and how do you move those together?
Yeah, that's another thing I noticed, and I think I saw it on a lot of the projects. But you always approach things from what I like to think of as the oblique angle. You know what I mean? It's sort of like this was a technology. I think it was the the windows that you could through electricity could frost or whatever, and we used it as projection and could fade it in and out. It was sort of like this was designed for one thing, but because our company and led by you crossed all these different disciplines, suddenly you're introducing things that seem like magic to these people. And I always found that interesting. The other project I thought was great because it really was a hybrid of theater and every other discipline was the Bill of Rights touring, because that really was a challenge. Here you have this priceless, irreplaceable document, and a great pulsing kind of thing for throughput, but having to load it and move it. And one night, I just remember the day we had to actually ship the next day because I had to get on the road, and everybody was so exhausted and done, and it was me and this one guy, Damien, who was sort of a strange guy. Everybody had gone home and we weren't done with the main truck. We hadn't put the camera on, and I was standing there going, well, we're just gonna have to figure this out, and start drilling holes in a truck. Then I said, well, I hope we don't hit the gas tank because that'll really suck. Bran won't be happy tomorrow. But it was just raining, and everybody was. But that's what you do. It was like we're just gonna have to figure this out.
Make it work.
Yeah, make it work. And there's something satisfying about that.
And that was a fun project because no one had ever done anything like that. Basically, we built a theme park attraction designed for high throughput to bring the Bill of Rights to the citizens of the United States. We toured to all 50 states.
Amazing.
And the idea was don't screw up the document. That would be nice. And
Let everybody see it.
well, and how do you get the people at the National Archives and all the custodians and the conservators to believe that you're being equally thoughtful about this as anyone has been? But then how do you create an exciting theatrical experience for people, which is storytelling based? So it's not just, I'm going to wait hours to go look at a piece of paper nailed on a wall, but wrap a show and a story and produce a show around it. So there was, a queuing area, a pre-show, a film in an introductory theater, and then you went into 2 viewing pods, and by automation, the document in a secure container was taken from a transit vehicle that was built for it by automation, shown in one booth, shown in another. So it was not a show that made apologies for, gee, sorry, we're on the road, so we couldn't do this the way we really wanted to. It was done as well as you would expect it to have been done at a Disney or at a Museum of Modern Art or wherever you'd see it. And so, it was fun doing that. And then crewing it and staffing it and dealing with that. And then dealing with the fact that because we're in 50 states, sometimes we're in arenas, sometimes we're in stadiums, sometimes we're in, VFW halls. It was a matter of how do you advance that so that you can move quickly and get it done. And again, I think it was our combination experience working in theater, working in film production, working in rock and roll touring. All of those were brought to bear to make that happen.
No, and it was great because, you had to sort of pulse this thing from side to side and then spin it to allow everybody to see it. But what was great was the solution, because it had to rise up, actually helped with the drama of it all, because here it comes emerging up. I mean, that had to happen for a practical reason, but I loved how it turned into the best way to have a dramatic reveal as well. And then there was the digital soapbox, which I thought was great. If you remember Jamie Robertson, it was sort of like, well, how are we going to make sure if it's 1 person or 3 people? And he created the butt sensor. It was like based on the width. It was so, I love those elegant solutions. You're thinking, well, we're going to have to figure out how many people are in there, and he's like, no, I'll just know how wide the butt is, and if it's 3 butts, it just angle goes wider.
And for people, I'm not familiar with it, the digital soapbox, the idea was give everybody a voice so they could go into a little booth, whether it's an individual or family, and leave as part of the permanent record of the tour, which then got presented to the National Archive.
And we put it in the pre-show as well. Those who hit yes got to record it and put it in the pre-show.
And so, because again, you're doing this for people. How do you connect with them in the best possible way? And, sometimes you get it more right, sometimes you get it more wrong. But I think it was based upon the feedback we got, it was dramatically important for a lot of people. And they felt connected with their country in a way they hadn't. Seems like this might be a good time to try doing something that again.
Good Lord.
Complex moment in our history.
It is a very interesting moment in the history, but it's the Chinese curse, right? May you live in interesting times. But all good. But no, it's so fascinating. And for me, I did, after that first year, spend about 3 months in law school because I had gotten the scholarship and left. And I think I called you after 3 months and basically said, yeah, I'm not going to stay. And I remember you saying, well, you're smarter than I thought. I gave you a year, actually. And I said, yeah, I couldn't take 3 months. And, it was great. And then we worked on the, Disney stuff. And
for those, who aren't aware of the history, we started working with Disney a lot. So we were introduced through Jim Henson. And
is that how it got?
That's when we were doing, remember we were working with Jim for a theme park development. And so met with him, and I was originally introduced to him by Marshall Brickman. So it's all sort of a small world. So, and Jim and I got along very well, and we were helping with theme park things. Then when they were acquiring Jim's company, Jim told Michael Eisner and Frank Wells, you should really look at, acquiring these folks as well, which was nice. And that started a collection of people coming out to visit, Marty Sklar, Dave Fink, collections of others, Frank Wells, were, flying out on the jet to the little airport next to us. And they turned over the course of, year and a half to our largest customer, which was good. But I was developing strategy for the company and technology, helping Frank conceptualize how do we work with the cable companies and do all of that. So all of that was Larry Murphy, strategic planning. So I was fairly heavily embedded in future growth strategy and technology and new vectors, like if you recall, we did interactive television with Jerry Laybourne, Telefusion and such.
Way ahead.
All of that stuff started at a time when I wasn't part of the company, and they became 85% of our business, and which meant if they pulled the plug, I'm in trouble looking for work. And I didn't actually work for them and was doing core strategy for the company. So, it became, in Michael Eisner's words, we needed either a more permanent or a less permanent relationship. And so that ended up acquiring the company, and we all went along with the office furniture and went from there. What were your thoughts when that was all happening?
Well, that's very interesting, only from the standpoint that, my dad was all about museums. We drove up and down the East Coast, museums and battlefields. So Smithsonian and everything, not theme parks. He did not think theme parks were
not serious.
Were good for the mind, yeah. And they changed their mind later. But I remember, Tammy Garcia was the HR person who's still there with me. But she said, "You're an Imagineer," and I remember saying, "I was an English major. That's not a word." So yes. I don't know what. I didn't know. I really had no. If you remember, Susan LeBaer was a big fan. They're all excited. I was like, I don't know why everybody's so excited about this Disney thing. I learned later. It's pretty great. But it was just a bizarre. I thought, I will tell you, at that time, I thought, great, closer to Hollywood, closer to filmmaking, which I actually find the dimensional storytelling and immersive storytelling much more fascinating. I like film, obviously.
Who knew?
But yeah,
exactly.
I know.
Surprise,
who knew exactly? I mean, it took about 5 years for me for that to click, but. Yeah, I had no clue. I thought it was incredibly exciting. I mean, I like change, and I thought you were always very good at not being timid about change. I mean, you would pivot very quickly. And we definitely appreciated there was long periods of time when you're out, obviously beating the bushes and getting work, for us.
I noticed, yeah.
Yeah, and we were, and there was interesting periods. I will say, to your credit, none of us missed a paycheck, which, having run companies now in my 7-year hiatus from Disney, I understand that that's not the easiest.
It's not as easy as some might think.
Not at all. Especially people who work in big corporations.
Yeah, I mean, I'm proud to say we never missed a paycheck at that company.
Not once.
I've never missed it at Applied Minds.
Yep.
And it's painful because your house is on the line and, everything else. And when you're in a little company, it doesn't take much going wrong to turn you from everything's great to end of the world as we know it.
I've noticed now working at Disney where we hire a lot. I'm trying to be incredibly sensitive to the vendors because, Disney, every big company can put small companies out of business. A lot of them is much less. It's like a 3 to 6 month, runway, I'll say, from my startup days. What was Associates of Ferren at that time? How much runway did you have? It was sort of like...
Oh, I'm sure it changed all the time. We were never capitalized. All the money was just from what we earned and made. And the problem is that you staff up for a big project and then the big project's over. Yeah. And it's not as easy as just saying, thank you, everyone, have a nice day, and so it's difficult. And even though the perspective from people who work at a company is, this guy's getting rich on us, and once you've seen it from the other side, you realize it's not quite that straightforward. But I always thought that it was important to look after the employees. And so, for example, I only agreed to do the Disney acquisition if all the people at the company were taken care of. Yep. And so when you arrived, you had your tenure from Associates in Ferren applied as if you had the same tenure at Disney. That was great. Which actually matters to your wallet and a whole bunch of in your seniority, which in a big company is not a trivial factor.
It's huge.
And so, and again, I mean, early in the negotiations, it was apparent that Disney would have been just as happy to have me go there. Yeah. And, do they really need a company with, some more Imagineers? And the answer is, well, they appreciated the talent that was there. Yeah. Witness you. They wouldn't have a creative head if it weren't for that.
Twice.
Yeah, exactly. But it's very, these are talent-driven industries, and they're used to brokering talent as a commodity, and that's what it's about. And half the time someone will get hired not because they want to hire the person, because they don't want them going to somewhere else. Yeah. It's
defensive. Yeah.
Exactly. But I said, no, it's this, and this is a talent resource, and I want them along, and I want you to take care of them. And so it was, it was not, none of the people in the company knew these negotiations were going on, but it was very important to me that they all get looked after so that, their investment in Applied Minds, now, then investment in Associates in Ferren was not zeroed out from the acquisition, so they became quote unquote ordinary employees as if they were just hired.
No, I would say the majority of the people transitioned very well. I think everybody was enthusiastic. It was I think it was great for, Imagineering needed it, quite frankly. Needed an infusion of the talent, but I also think the attitude, the entrepreneurial kind of like just get it done, the show must go on theater side, sense of urgency, which I'm, facing right now, having come back just for 7 months. That sense of urgency is really important. Just,
Well, and it was interesting because, we were brought in, I was brought in to help disrupt, which is never a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I mean, it's nice to, the work is fun, but the reaction of people that are being disrupted is seldom fun.
Yeah.
And so when we looked at projects, we had started, I think when we were still consulting, doing things like helping with Honey, I Shrunk the Audience and other stuff. And it was sort of, they were planning an approach of using hydraulic motion control for seating, and we shifted to airbags as a way to do that, which has now become fairly standard in the industry, but that was the first time that had been done.
Yeah.
And then it was Tower of Terror, Tower of Terror, where you got to play Rod Serling.
I did play Rod Serling.
Exactly, and when we mocked it up.
5 perfect takes, by the way.
Exactly. But, that was being traditionally developed by ShowRide, and the ride system they developed was, by management's perspective, completely unaffordable. So, it was completely unaffordable.
Right.
So, and
tale as old as time.
well, exactly. And so I got involved in that. And from a practical point of view, the starting point was, well, what would make this exciting and such? And instead of designing a complex ride system, how about using elevators? To do an elevator.
Supposed to be an elevator.
Which didn't seem totally shocking. And I don't know if you remember our first trip to Otis Elevator.
Oh, God, yeah. I had to sit there and hit the audio and lighting cues.
Well, it was so funny sitting in their boardroom, 100-year-old boardroom.
Oh, yeah, they didn't want to.
And gave them the pitch of what it's about. And, the most senior person there said, Mr. Ferren, what you're trying to do, this company has spent the past 100 years making sure never happens.
Right, exactly.
So that was the start of the conversation. But the ride system worked. It came together. It was a great collaboration between the R&D group and ShowRide, doing solutions that I don't think either would have been able to do on their own.
Yeah,
and so the accumulated experience of the ShowRide group, which is, voluminous, but as well as saying, well, let's just take a fundamental different set of ways of doing this. And it was the thing I was pushing is making it a software definable ride system so you could reprogram it.
Yes.
Which had never been done before. And they've made good use over that over the years.
Oh, it's a huge hit. That's
Here's the special Halloween show and the
lots
other
of marketing and revisitation because of it. But yeah.
But that for me was a lot of fun because our little group was actively involved in all of that in a way that I think was, came up with a better solution than would have happened by any of us not collaborating together.
Oh, yeah.
And, a place like Imagineering is about collaboration. It's how do you get the best writers and the best everyone. Yeah. And that's what's remarkable about the organization is it has a scope and a depth. At the same time, that can be its Achilles heel is, well, we've always done it this way, and this is how we're comfortable with it and know how to do it. I'm sure you find that.
It is true. It is true. And I always try to, because it is you brought in, we should talk about this too, the Fellows Program, but Danny Hillis was one of the great ones, I think. And he's probably quoting someone, but he said, it's good design when everything gets simpler.
Yeah, exactly.
It's sort of like it just all falls into place. You're like, well, that's actually easy. And that's something that I always press because at Imagineering is, is this the simplest solution? Because when you have a lot of money, you think you can just throw a lot of money and force and everything at it, and you usually don't have to. That's what I love about theater.
Yep.
It's great.
Well, and the whole fellows program I created at the time.
Yeah.
Simply because I wanted to make us deeper in our intellectual ability and technical ability and so forth. And so Danny Hillis was our first fellow who invented massively parallel supercomputing. The
Incredible guy.
Thinking Machines was the company. Marvin Minsky, the father of artificial intelligence. Story Musgrave, the astronaut who fixed the Hubble Space Telescope. Seymour Papert, who did Logo and that. And so, we had a brain trust of people. One, I think, helped us be more thoughtful.
Yeah.
Two, inspirational, which also helped us attract talent, to be able to come and work with these people and such. But, I've always enjoyed collaboration, and we would constantly have folks like Murray Gell-Mann, Nobel Prize winner. You can thank him for quarks, and others. And, people like that who are not there on a regular basis, but were there on an irregular basis to help stimulate thinking and motivate people and so forth.
And it matters. I mean, I always think that when you're trying to, ultimately you have to narrow to the doable idea that is the best fit. But I always like in the beginning, when it's inexpensive and you're free to just think, you want to find those edges, and you need the people, who can take you very far out and be like, okay, well, we're not going to do that, but I'm glad we went there. Now we know how to back off. And that was really, I love that group. I mean, I think Danny was the most practical. We got a lot out of animation and things with him, with electric animation and things like this. But they were all great. And I think we only lost Seymour once or twice at the parks.
Yeah, occasionally.
We would literally get up in the morning and we'd
gotta be
have
here
a gathering and be
somewhere.
like, where's Seymour? Like, I don't know. He was walking out. It's like, oh no.
Exactly. Well, and the interesting part of it is just how do you get different types of talent to be able to contribute, because there is a matching problem when they don't speak the same language and they don't understand that. How do you put that together? And we started the Cambridge lab to be associated with MIT, and originally that started with wanting to have a presence in MIT. We couldn't work that out with the provost and protect the intellectual property. Right. And, that was the problem. And
Always
so
an issue.
we opened a lab across the street. We still funded Nicholas Negroponte in the lab, and Dimitri's at the company now here, so long history of Negropontes.
A lot of different Negropontes.
But, there's no substitute for creative talent and people who can think differently.
Yeah.
But it's not enough. You have to have a process and support system to take those ideas, make them practical enough to be able to use them, and then put them to work.
And that's I think that's the exciting thing about, landing at Disney, as you've set me up for. But, not only do you get to do that, but you do it globally. I get to do it globally and just deliver these kinds of experiences to people over and over. It's pretty amazing. And it is this great hybrid of theater and everything I learned. There wasn't a better training ground than Association Ferren when you think about it,
We enjoyed having you and glad you took something with it. And then it was fun at Disney. For me, Test Track was a fun project.
That was great.
Because that was one we got to invent from the ground up.
Yeah.
And, that had really started from the perspective of GM, who was the sponsor of the GM Pavilion. Their term was up, I think it was 10-year sponsorship or so at Epcot. And so the question is, can we get them to renew?
Right.
This was the time when the automotive industry was doing terribly. And so everyone's sense was, this is going to go away. Going away means that Disney would be paying for it or have a closed pavilion, which the park operations people, not thrilled about, with good reason. And so the question is, can we come up with something to happen? I remember I was in meetings at the time, it was with Marty Sklar and with Michael Eisner, and, talking about, well, what do we do? And so the idea is, well, maybe we can do a new pre-show film and, do something like that. And, then there was, well, there's a little bigger one. And I said, well, would you mind if I take a crack at a whole new attraction? And the answer was, they're never going to go for it. They don't have any money. They're doing this. And I said, yeah, but then you could use what we do as a loss leader and, go for the rest of it. And so we put together a group of people. We had Kevin Rafferty, other folks that Chris Carradine, folks that I've been working with on others projects. So you knew what they were good at and such. And the idea of a test track seemed sensible. Marty and I were talking about that. And, his comment was, I don't think people know how much they put into car testing and all. And I said, well, I don't. So, went and looked at some of those. And so the idea of a test track, and that was the first project I got to have hands-on to put the whole team together and put that in a way that goes from just a scribble on a piece of paper, use the whole Imagineering team and the R&D team, go pitch it to GM, sell it, and get a yes.
Right.
So that was fun. And, from my perspective, that was a kind of payoff in yet a new business of all the things that we learned at Associates and Ferren and doing all the other things, including how do you sell an idea?
Yeah.
Because this is not an inexpensive idea to sell.
And not something Imagineering typically had to do,
Exactly.
It was convince Michael and, and that was about it.
And that was about it. Yeah. And so this was, were you there for the actual pitch when we did it?
I don't think I was.
Yeah, it was, I think, a smaller team. It was to the board of directors, and it was, Larry Burns was the head of R&D, was CEO of the company, the head of each of the divisions. And my philosophy was everyone was telling me how they don't have any money and it has to all be about safety and it's all, endless numbers of guidance. And I just said, look, my bet is these are car guys. And why don't we appeal to car guys? And this is not about anything other than the fun and the thrill of driving and what it takes to create these magnificent machines that do that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then why don't we take people on a really exciting experience? Worked with Show Ride, developed a whole new concept in powered roller coasters, which hadn't been done at that time. I remember I made everybody crazy because the idea was we're going to go backstage, and no one had ever gone backstage at Disney. It was taboo. You don't show guests backstage. And my attitude was, if they're spending their time looking around backstage, we got something really wrong.
Right.
They ought to be holding on for dear life and seeing what it is. And so, that was, for me, a kind of fun culmination of all of those elements coming together in a way that I thought, was satisfying because, again, I can always think of what we could have done better and so forth. But the idea that we can invent in a different medium, this theme park medium and such, and basically build a virtual world, but out of bricks and mortar rather than bits. So that was a hoot.
We're in the middle of the, 5th refresh right now, actually. Next week I'm seeing a pitch. So it continues.
Sounds good.
And it is the same ride system we used on Radiator Springs Racers for Cars Land in Anaheim. So it was definitely well worth doing. And I was also thinking, when I first joined and Dave Fink was running the R&D thing, it was very closed. Like Marty couldn't even get in with his badge because it was, and then when you took over, we started doing the open houses and things like this, which was, I think, a really big shift in the view of the kind of work that, the innovators and the research and development.
Well, my view is we're there to help people achieve things they haven't done before. So why aren't we welcoming them in and actually spending some time listening to them rather than just tell them what we're doing and so forth.
And show it. It's also a great management tool for innovators because it's very difficult without a real critical path deadline to get them to take all the wires and everything and put it together and say, take a look at it.
The thought had crossed my mind.
It's like,
deadlines are important.
Yeah.
It motivates everyone. And by the way, if it doesn't bother you that your thing looks like shit and doesn't work, okay, but this open house is next Wednesday. And so
Exactly.
we're going to stop right here, and then it's over to you.
Snapshot in time.
Well, and you need that. Just like on a
Yeah.
Broadway show, there's opening night, and on a rock show, the curtain's going up. That sense in these businesses, the, on the day moment is an important motivator.
It is.
And it's very different in the theme park business because you're going to open something that's expected to be there for 20 years. Film business, it has to last as long as you get the shot.
That's right.
Different sensibilities, but still, when the guest walks into it or when the camera starts rolling, it's got to be ready.
Has to be ready. Yeah, film you can hide. The theme park building, you're sort of stuck with. But no, you're right though, and I think it goes back to to what you're saying is it's never going to be perfect. So if there isn't some sort of deadline, you can noodle forever. It's like this. Finally, you just have to deliver it.
What's the favorite project you worked on at Imagineering? Do you have one?
Yeah. So actually, ultimately, well, I'll say I thought Tower of Terror was a lot of fun. But I actually thought the one that didn't go, and then I'll cut to the cruise ships were by far the funnest thing that we get to work on because it's the whole city, many layers. But the one that didn't go, Toontown Transit, if you're, obviously that was sort of
that was fun.
It was great, 270 seamless projection before digital, so we had to do the
I'd actually forgotten about that one, but that was
it was great. We had a full simulator and tore it out of the floor a couple of times. But it was so, and it blew everybody's mind. It's just they went with the what you would call it, Roger Rabbit. But it was, I think that was probably the project that, because it was such a great bringing together of our projection from rock and roll to the mechanical kind of things, that Associates of Ferren did. It was really, to me, as someone who had only been there about 4 or 5 years, a culmination of all the different disparate pieces. We shot the film. If you remember, we had to make a camera rig. It was kind of crazy.
And that was the nice thing about the way we were able to operate, is doing all of it. I mean, we're producing the film. We invented the simulator. We invented the projection system. We built custom lenses for it and so forth. And it was a big. I wonder if there are drawings around anywhere. I have no idea.
I don't know. It'd be great to see.
It was a big immersive. It was about a
270, right?
Yeah, 270
I think it was
degrees.
270.
You were in this Toontown cabin, which was on a motion simulator, which moved around.
Probably 5 degrees of freedom or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And it was, from a practical point of view, it was designed to be quite affordable.
Yeah.
And people loved it. But like I say, you win some, you lose some. Some happen, some don't.
It led to Tower of Terror, so
Yeah, exactly.
that was the important thing.
And the fact is, sometimes you dust off the ideas 20 years later, and it turns out, what about that approach?
Completely. Yeah. Completely. Yeah. And then, look, I think Imagineering I love all of it, everything from the parades to everything. And I think the variety, I always think I probably have a little bit of ADHD, so it's very useful in that I shift in a day from an entertainment thing to a nighttime spectacular to a giant attraction. To, you know what I mean? It's kind of fun. I think you have the same sort of way, because when I look at everything, well, I know what we did at Associates of Ferren, but then at Disney and then now at Applied Minds when I did the tour, it's like, okay, there's all these, for most people, they'd be like, wait a minute, what does the company do? Like everything? It's like...
Yeah, well, you try, so everything fun.
I think that was interesting. I remember one time you came back from in the spirit of that, it was sort of like, that's also something I learned, is nothing's off the table. It's like, if you have an idea that's good, don't censor it. It was the Revo sunglasses. And I don't know whether you already had talked to them or not, but I remember you came back from a flight, I think you told us when we were sitting, and you said you realized that you could see the reflection on the back of the lens, and no one was doing the anti-reflection on the back of the lens. And actually that was causing a problem, and it was like, what an interesting thing. And suddenly we were doing, I remember Susan LeBert was like, well, now we're doing sunglass coatings.
Right, like, exactly.
How did that happen?
Well, and that was the first time, Revo was the first time thin film dichroic filters were used. And everyone said, too expensive, it'll never fly. I mean, this is when, it was $59.95 for Ray-Bans, which is the top of the market. And Revo, when it hit, was $279 as, base price point. But they were very high performance. And it was interesting to me because the color reflections off the front And, they were tuned so that if you were in a high infrared environment like water or wet sand, it had an orange reflection to cut more into the red and infrared portion of the spectrum. For ultraviolet mirrors like snow, they were the blue, and the ones in violet was in between. So these colors were artifacts of that. But of course, we tuned the artifacts to be as attractive looking as possible. Everyone said it's not going to sell because I remember people saying, you look like a fly when you're wearing this. And it turned out that's probably what made them sell.
Yeah.
And it created that whole industry for flash coatings on things just to make the color. But it's always fun to move into a new field like sunglasses, meaning a new old field, which is perceived to be stagnant, mature, and so forth, and be able to disrupt it. That's what we did with Revo. Of course, the enormous examples are things like the iPhone and smartphones and what it did to the Motorola flip phones and Nokias, where everyone thought that's a stable business, but not. I don't know if you remember, we did the whole personal navigator project.
God, I've forgotten about that.
Yeah, so we basically invented the smartphone about 15 years before the smartphone.
And the iPad, we did the whole, I forget what we called that, electronic paper.
The electronic book. We did that for Michael Ovitz for the Publishers Conference.
That's right.
And he presented it, and of course everyone said, this is ridiculous, it's never going to happen.
Nope, and before TiVo, we had the, I think Jerry Laybourne quit the day that we showed it, but it was literally, what did we call that? It was telefusion. Yeah. Whole thing. And I just remember all the executives sitting there, and we showed all the features, and Wolfgang Puck, and you could print a recipe and buy the stuff off the TV, and they were like, we don't want it.
Right.
It's like, this isn't a choice. It's coming.
Yeah, exactly. And
it was insane.
We did the first major digital cinema work. So we converted the El Capitan Theater and did that. As you recall, we did music delivery directly to the home.
Oh, yeah, Scott Watson and
Exactly, which, now you'd call...
That was a clever name, too. I couldn't remember it.
Right. What was the name for that?
It was clever.
Now it's called iTunes.
Yeah.
But we did it 10 years, 12 years before iTunes. And so it was interesting. And it's also interesting. I mean, we made billions of dollars for the company, and I'm proud of that. And, that was nice. But we probably left $10 billion on the table of things we couldn't get them to do.
Yeah.
You remember this was a project Danny was leading, which was the Disney box.
Yep.
Now that would be called a PlayStation.
Yep.
But again, we did it 10 years before the PlayStation. And so it was always interesting to see how many things you can build, prototype, show people that when it's ahead of its time, it doesn't matter that you showed it to them. It doesn't matter that, it worked great and all of that.
Yeah.
You just can't get them to believe it's part of their reality.
Well, we're still not into video games or that kind of storytelling. And I thought Alan Kay's work was great. We always had to pitch it for him because he was too intellectual. Yeah. But the premise of how to get into education through a very Imagineering approach, I still think it was brilliant.
Yes, and Squeak, the operating system, and
cool.
set of tools.
Basically, if I remember right, when he explained it to me, it got me jazzed. He said, like when even I was a kid, but when you and he were, you could take apart a watch, you could see how things work. Then when it became digital, you can't take things apart anymore. So how do you learn about the world as a kid? So he was basically doing that in the computer, if I remember right. You could go in and tinker and try things
and you could take parts and put them back together.
Yeah.
I mean, Alan was one of the key inventors of object-oriented programming.
Yeah.
And so the notion of how do you build an object-oriented operating system where you can build objects and connect them to other objects and do what the physical world did, but do it in a software environment. Yeah, I thought it was important. And, I thought it would have been a novel entry for us into the gaming space that was just starting to develop then, but make it a very Imagineering-centric. And I remember the one that I was particularly fond of was Disney Space. Do you remember Disney Space?
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So Disney Space was saying, we're going to create and blur the line between physical and online.
Yeah.
And we're going to have people online interacting with people in the theme parks and vice versa, and creating a new generation of interactive characters and AI, et cetera. It happens we had the father of AI on our staff.
True,
so
that's right.
We understood how to do that. But, the idea, still hasn't happened and will.
Yeah.
I thought that was a very, and again, that was something where I got a lot of, gee, that's really interesting, but
There is this, yeah, it is an interesting thing. People get in their swim lanes and they don't know how to break out of it. And it is fascinating when that happens, because you're right. Even now, when you look at, I cannot think of the name of but all the virtual real estate and things people are buying and all these kinds of things, that's where Disney absolutely should be. People would kill.
Exactly. But it's just very hard when people have a successful business model to get them to change it without being forced to change.
That's true. Momentum.
The old, it's working, don't break it.
That's right.
And the other answer is it's working, break it.
Yeah.
But it's actually very hard to get most executives to be willing to bet the farm on something new and unproven. And look, I always perceived our job as R&D and my job as being responsible for that for the company was to show them options, show it in a language. That's why we were always very demo oriented. So,
yes.
I don't want you to read a PowerPoint deck. I want you to go feel it and experience it. And when we did with Jerry interactive television, we had a room full of computers and then another room, which was a living room. Yeah. And the room full of computers were doing what a set-top box does now.
Oh, God, yeah.
But, then it was silicon graphics machines up the yin-yang to be able to do it. And a lot of people like Scott Watson doing clever coding and making that stuff run. So, and again, do I regret those things? Well, one side of me says, gee, it would have been nice.
No.
And the other side says, on to the next one.
Oh, I totally agree with that. You just, I completely. Well, you said something the other day in our phone conversation, which is, I think, so true. I taught UCLA immersive design for 15 years or something, and kids would always ask, how do you become so successful? Well, first of all, it's always an odd question. You're like, well, okay, I guess maybe this is successful, but you said, well, you just keep saying yes, and I think that is one of the key things. I sort of say, just stop fighting it. Be a leaf in a stream, or have an open hand. Don't try to grasp something so hard. Let go in a direction and let things sort of come, and say yes a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
And
well,
it's amazing what happens when you do that. And if it doesn't work out, that's fine. What does work out? You've moved on.
And at a certain level, how hard can it be, right? It's not like we're splitting the atom here,
Exactly.
and we figured out how to do that. So the reality is, with most of these things, say yes and then figure out how to do it. Because
completely agree.
I don't think there's ever been anything I've been hired for that I'm qualified for by any traditional definition of, well, have you done it before? Well, no, we haven't done that. Can you do it? Sure. No reason why
Someone's
not.
got to figure it out.
And again, I think you have to be straight with people about saying, well, we've never done this, but we've done things that are similar, and I think we've got enough foundation to be able to do it. And by the way, we have a plan B and a plan C, so that if the first idea we discussed doesn't work, we've got a fallback that'll work just fine.
Yeah.
And, and then people say, well, why don't you just do that? It's lower risk. And the answer is because it's not as good,
Right.
So the reality is the stretch goal is going to give an extraordinary experience, where the other one's going to give a quite nice experience.
Right.
Which would you rather be known for?
Yeah. No, I think that's it too. And I think there's a level of curiosity too that I think is so important, right? Just about the world and about all the different disciplines, and when something that doesn't feel like it fits comes in, the curiosity part, I think, is what makes it, it's like, well, I don't know, we'll learn something trying. I always found that was part of what you bring to the table. It's like, well, who knows, maybe this will be interesting.
And if not, next.
Yeah, next. It's not the end of the world.
I think
like
that's the other thing, is you have to be willing to throw out ideas. It's not working. Yeah, there are two personality types. One that will run it into the ground.
Yep.
And my attitude is, I admire that, just like I admire craftspeople who want to make the perfect violin or the perfect rocking chair, and will spend 20 years working on it. I've always
Gives
been
me hives, but it's good.
Generate a new idea, hit the deck with it, and then, it doesn't work, next, go on to the other one. Because in the long run, you just get more successes under your belt than if you cling on to trying to make it work. I think a big mistake people make is treating their ideas as precious.
Yes.
And,
Completely.
the fact is that you got more ideas. So, don't cling to this one, just get on to the other one. Don't go sulk.
It's funny you bring that up. I think there's two things I've noticed in, it's like an old person now, younger generations. One
The old
is
fart.
I know, damn it. The one is the fear of failure. I like learned to, you embrace failure. That, you do learn more from failure than you do
It's
success.
a necessary part of success.
It's
period.
what's fun. It's sort of like, oh well. But then there's also this sense of not wanting to spend the time to learn something. And it's almost like if I haven't learned it in 3 months, then I guess I'm not good at it. And it's like, well, no. It's like many things take, you got to keep going and keep trying and keep going at it. And you know what I mean? If it's something that turns you on. It's so fascinating to me how often I'll see, people, 30 and under sort of just give up on things. They're like, well, I must not be good because I couldn't do it in this amount of time. I'm like, how long it took that person to.
Exactly. And you got to keep at it. Be
I think
positive, keep at it. And, build yourself the support system you need to be able to do that. And whether that's a mate at home in your personal relationship who's there, with you, is it family members, is it work colleagues, doesn't matter. Everyone needs support from time to time.
It's true.
And everybody gets down from time to time.
Yep.
So the question is, how much are you going to let that affect what you do?
And allow that to happen too. Because I think a lot of people
exactly.
read too much into that too. We're all, everybody is going to have those moments, and it's okay. That is true. So what, because I also think the definition of success, I meet with a lot of people who will show me their, some have mapped out their career, and they're like, by this time I'll be a VP. I'm like, why do you care about being a VP? What does VP mean to you? It's like this thing. I've never thought about title, and I know you certainly haven't, and yet, people are like, well, yeah, but you achieved. And I was like, because I never thought about it, I actually think,
Yeah,
is why.
exactly. I never cared what my title
Yeah,
was.
so how do you define
Now,
success?
The exception of that is when you're in a big company, titles matter to others.
For authority.
And so there you do have to pay attention to it from that perspective. But the idea that you self-identify by your title in a company, really, why would you do that?
Yeah, and it comes down to what is successful. I think this is always a big question for a lot of people too, as they're, moving through life. It's like, how do you define, I'm turning 30, I'm turning 40, I'm turning 50, am I successful? And I was like, well, are you happy with your life? I mean.
Well, and for me, the notion of if you're focused on becoming a this and you become that, then what? Life's over? So the idea is, what's your trajectory and where are you going? Now, I found at Disney, when they made me a president, which was amusing because I'd never worked anyone before. And so, I came in as an executive vice president, came in as senior vice president, went to executive vice president, and went to president in 4 years.
Yeah.
Which I was told is a remarkable time frame. Maybe there was nothing remarkable about it, but what was nice about being a president, if I said, can I use the jet, they would occasionally say yes, which they didn't when you weren't.
That's true. This is true. Yeah.
That's why for me, there was certainly advantage to title in what it made easier to get done at a big corporation.
True.
But beyond that, I mean, the idea that anything beyond that mattered to me, it's not even a matter. I never even thought about it.
Yeah.
It was just not a topic.
Yeah, it's also it's interesting too, because I had, 8 years ago, I left Disney and I took, I thought maybe I'll semi-retire or do something.
Well, let's talk about that. Why did you leave? What?
It's true that you leave managers, not jobs. I worked directly for Mr. Chapek for 7 months, and that's all it took.
And that was enough.
Well, and it was interesting. You remember Meg Crofton? Do you remember Meg? She was great.
Yeah.
She was probably running Disney World at the time, and then she moved up to a much higher position. She's a very kind, thoughtful person, and once. Staggs moved on and Chapek took over, and I was with him on a daily basis. We just didn't click. And by the way, I didn't know he would fail as CEO or anything at the time. We just weren't clicking. And when you're working that close as a creative executive,
if you can't talk to each other, it's not a thing.
So I called her and I said, God, this is like just miserable. Like nothing I say is like clicking with him, and I won't back down. I'm not just going to roll over. So. We were fighting a lot, and she just said, write in if you don't have one, get a journal and write in it and how you feel, and then 3 months later say, is it, the same, worse, or better? And she said, do that 3 times. I made it 7 months, so I only put in 2 entries, and it was getting worse. And I got to 7 months, I didn't have to go 9. And I said, this is over. And it was a few things, as you know, with life. Not that 50 is a big age, but my parents had suddenly gotten old. How people plateau,
Yes, well, I noticed
and
that.
then they drop, and suddenly my dad was getting dementia, my mom broke her hip, and all those things that people do. And I thought, you know what?
Well, at a certain point, it just all stops working.
And I was very shocking. You go home and suddenly, we're like, oh God, this is happening.
Well, and the person you knew isn't there anymore.
They're not there. And you're like, okay, so I wanted more time, and it was like a great time to leave. And I've never been one to just, obviously I left law school, and so it's like, I'm just not going to do it. And, I don't have kids, so it paid well. And I was like, well, I got bored in 3 months. 3 months, great, had fun, And then I was like, I don't understand this retirement goal even. I don't think I have no desire to retire.
I can't think of anything that's worse for a person than retiring. I don't know where this concept, it's a modern concept. No one ever used to do it.
It's more companies wanting to not pay them
It's
anymore.
like putting your brain out to pasture. Why would you? I mean, it's terrible for your health. Look at the rate at which people deteriorate after they retire.
Yeah, it's just a fascinating, but that was another thing too that I tell mentees, younger people, is like, don't make that your goal. Everybody gets so hung up on where you're going to be by 65 or whatever. It's like, forget that. It's like, follow what you love. The pay that's the least of your worries. It's just going to somehow flow. I do believe in the sort of magicalness of it all. If you show up, with who you are.
Exactly. And we're in perfect sync on it. And I've always thought that, when you sort of look at the trajectory of a career, the only time it makes sense is in retrospect after it's happened. The idea that you're going to predict it,
right?
It's just, it's not sensible. And
if anything, that's constraining. You're probably
exactly, because if you can predict it or think you can, either you're going to be unhappy when it doesn't happen, or you're going to make it happen when something else might have been more, or, there are a whole bunch of outcomes, but none of them are particularly great.
Yeah.
It was just, I was listening to a comedian the other day, I forget the name, was talking about marriage, and they're saying, well, it either ends one of 2 ways, divorce or death. So, well, what a cheerful outlook.
There you go.
But it kind of sums it.
It does sum it up, right?
And I think in a lot of these things that the idea that you can pre-plan it all is silly. But what's sad is if you can, right? Because why would you not want new, exciting, unpredicted things happening in your life? Why would you want to be I'm on the subway and it's going to stop at 59th Street, then 125th?
Sure.
Well, is that a way to lead a life well led? I don't think so.
No, it's very interesting. I cannot learn languages well for whatever reason. Maybe it's a lack of dedication, or just the way my brain is wired. But I spent a lot of time trying to learn French. Right?
How'd it go?
Oddly enough, when I'm in France, I can speak better than I think, but not well. But I learned a word, and this is what I think one of the great things when you learn foreign languages, because I naively just assumed there's a word for every word, but culturally there's different things, and there's not a word for every word actually. And one of the French words, flaneur, do you know that word, flaneur? It's very interesting. They have a concept that is very un-American. The flaneur is someone who wanders pretty much aimlessly with no goal. You step out your front door and you just wander the city for fun. That's it. You have no specific goal. Very un-American. We always have a goal. And what's great about that, and then you understand when you're in Paris and their cities, that's designed for that. Because you're going to end up someplace great.
Good place to wander around.
Good place to wander aimlessly, because you're going to end up someplace great. But it's one of those things, once I learned that word, I began to rewire myself of like, that's a fun way to live life. It's sort of like, don't have so many, endpoints. Sort of just let it be. I could not have predicted I would have gotten a phone call in February to come back to Imagineering. It was done.
Yeah.
I hadn't gone back to it. My last day was the opening of Shanghai Disneyland in 2016. That was the last Disney soil I had stood on for 7 years, because that was then, and now I've moved on. And then, but had I not been open or, whatever, and just been sort of like, well, maybe this is the journey now, let's come back.
So tell us a little bit about the jobs you did in between.
So that was interesting. Once I realized after my 3 months that I want to work.
Gonna go crazy.
Yeah. Oddly enough, again, serendipitously, I was still an advisor at the UCLA Theater, Film, and Television School, and they were just beginning to look at VR. And I had worked, if you remember, the Aladdin VR ride. So I'd dabbled in VR at Disney, and we learned a lot about faking the real world, which is, if you want to appreciate the real world, try to fake it. So, and also...
And Aladdin, for those who aren't aware, was the first VR ride
Incredible.
that was built, and it was built
Magic carpet.
25, 30 years ago.
Yeah, 94. It was in
we
Epcot.
basically had to invent
probably.
and build the displays. Eric Hasseltine
Everything.
was doing that, and we had to write the code. And,
artificial nose, remember? Because
exactly, there was nothing, that was known about it. But as if I recall, we ran about 275,000 people through it the theme parks to learn about motion sickness and how do people react and what works from a storytelling perspective.
And it was a perfect, invented technology with the perfect creative, which is always something you look for, flying on a magic carpet. Everybody wants to fly. The best part of that whole thing was the reactions of people in wheelchairs, because they never felt that freedom. And that was one of those things that was just beautiful to hear those stories of that, for them. It was just throughput. You couldn't get enough people through it. Over time, it became impractical. But I knew a lot about it, and I always felt where VR was going, this was now 7 years ago, was video gamey and shooter and very boring. There was no full body presence. And so I had my whole soapbox at this advisory meeting, and there's a guy, Kevin Wall. Have you ever met Kevin Wall? Kevin Wall did live, he did he didn't do the Geldof one, but he did all the other big Al Gore kind of concerts and all this kind of stuff. But then he made a lot of money off of investing in Facebook and got into other things. He and Walter Parks, who was sort of the producer for DreamWorks, he was the live action head of the studio with Steven Spielberg and Hans Zimmer and those guys. They had invested in a technology out of Geneva, which was all academic, but they were doing it for medical and PTSD research, but it allowed full body presence. So you don't have to use trackers anymore, but you have 2 trackers on your feet, 2 trackers on your hand, a backpack and a head mount, and all the backpack and everything's gone now, but at the time it wasn't. But you were untethered and you could walk freely and see each other, up to 6 people at a time in a space, and they wanted to do entertainment with it. And so we pretty much, it's still open in Century City, but we created many theme park attractions, quite frankly, free-ranging VR, and it was a really crazy, fun. So I had to be, it was my first time CEO, startup. Me and one other, I met a COO who I didn't know, and that was the company and this technology, a bunch of 2 Swiss academics, and and it was like, now build a company and raise money. So I got a little taste of what you went through all those years, where it's like, I learned as CEO, or owner, you basically spend 75% of your time raising money, and and then 100% of your time, because you have to work that hard, running the company and doing the creative and figuring out everything else. But it was a great journey, and we did open quite a few, and it's still out there in the world. And
did it make money?
It never made money per se. It still exists as a startup. Still, they're in the series, God knows what at this point. With Arizona State University. Do you know Michael Crow at Arizona State? Yeah. So there's a big push there to do curriculum with VR biology and things like this. There's a few in the Middle East and here in Century City. There's a few of the LBE. The LBE business, as you know, is so difficult. Location-based entertainment, for those who don't know.
No one's ever really figured it out.
It's just
we thought with Disney Quest and with other things that the Disney brand would, have enough power to do it. But to date, it's been extremely elusive.
It's really difficult. And that was my worry. And they've achieved the trackless and all this kind of stuff. But we'll see where it goes. For me, it did allow me to hone the skills, because it was all virtual, of what is actually necessary in an immersive experience, a theme park attraction. And I did learn a lot from, Walter Parks as a really great producer, and spent a lot of time. Steven Spielberg was around a lot, and his, Steven, I'm sure, but his imagination and that kind of stuff is just, those people. Ridley Scott came by a lot. There's certain people that you're exposed to a lot, and I think I get exposed to, and we're very lucky. These people who just sort of, everybody knows their names. Most of them actually are achieved because they have a very unique perspective, and they have all these qualities we've talked about, right?
Yeah,
They
exactly.
they don't have these upper, I almost think it's like an upper limit. They just don't have that.
It never crossed their mind they can't do something.
Exactly. It's so interesting. And I also find that was interesting too for me was, and I think this is an important thing for people is, I think it's true. Who you hang out with rubs off on you. So you talked about surrounding yourself with a support group, and I think it's important when nurture that support group, make sure it's people that also are going to draw you aspirationally. I mean, don't you think? I mean, I find that
Absolutely.
very important.
Yeah, and surrounding yourself with good people, who are, it's hard enough to do these things if you're not working with jerks.
Yeah.
Or you're not working with negative people who just have all
Toxicity.
the reasons not to do it. And so, who you choose to associate with is very relevant. You really want people that are fun to work with,
Yeah.
and that when things are difficult, we just all calm down and let's come up with a solution. And unfortunately, in the entertainment industry, film business, all areas, there are screamers. There are people who thrive on chaos, and if there isn't any, they will create it on demand. Those are not the ones you want to work with.
No.
And you can tolerate some of it under some circumstances, but most of the time, this is just not worth the energy you
really
put
isn't.
into it. So you want to work with people who are optimistic and pleasant and want to get the job done just as much as you do.
No, it's true. You're very right. And I actually use a metric now, which at Associates Fair we laughed a lot. I mean, it was sometimes because of absurdity. We're doing things that we're like, this is nuts. How are we going to pull this off? But you found humor in it, and you allowed us. You never came down hard. For all the things we fucked up or made mistakes on. You saw it as like meaningful failure.
Well, screaming at people doesn't help get the job done. So the question is, it's important they understand that they're serious about it, because being cavalier translating into incompetent is not a great way to get anything done. And these are often dangerous businesses where you can hurt people, so you got to take safety seriously and do all of this. But if you're not smiling and having good humor about it and so forth, in my view, you're just missing a lot of the joy of why you should be doing it in the first place.
Especially when you're creating entertainment.
Exactly.
The idea of mana, it's like what the creator puts into it is going to come out.
Why should it be miserable?
It shouldn't be. So I use that as a criteria. If I wasn't like all through, Dreamscape, as crazy as it was and stressful, I was having fun. I mean, it was fun. We laughed a lot. It was creating. Imagineering, I do absolutely casting. Who you get around you is so important.
Well, and my philosophy, as you know, has never been it's about hiring. It is about casting.
It's about casting.
It's just like you're doing a play or a movie. Who should play this part? Who should do this? And I think that's a much more effective strategy for how you arrange the composition of the team that's going to work on what you're doing.
Yeah. And this may sound, I don't know what to certain people, but I think you cast your friend group as well, because I think a lot of people just go by proximity or because they're family members and all this kind of stuff. And it can seem maybe cold or whatever, but you don't want to leave people to suffer. But if who you choose, I just find this to be so important, who you choose on a daily basis to talk to. Or I think COVID brought that out. I would love to hear what you have to say to this. I was very interested we moved up to Sonoma, so we're in a beautiful place, beautiful view. It was a great place to go through a global pandemic if you had to pick some place. But it was also isolated, and then I wasn't in LA, so we weren't going to see anybody, and even if they wanted to. So it was phone calls, and it was so interesting how my Rolodex went down to such a small number of people after the first year and a half.
Sure.
Of who you really wanted to talk to on a weekly basis.
Yeah, exactly.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's interesting because, Kira, going through a very formative age.
How old was she during that?
She was, 10, 11, 12,
wow,
13,
that
14,
is...
And, while on one level people object about these kids are always staring at their phones and doing all of this, if it weren't for that, how would they have gotten through it? I mean, this was the social fabric of how they could connect to their friends and continue and build relationships. Now, I think in many businesses, such as the one that you're in and I'm in, you need people in the same physical space collaborating, or you don't get the same quality of work.
Completely agree.
And it's one thing if you split up a group that has worked well together and then they work independently. But it's completely different when you're hiring new people. How do you build the esprit de corps? How do you get them to learn to work as a cohesive unit? How do you get the chemistry of a great meeting with a whiteboard going when there's no great meeting with a whiteboard?
Oh my God.
And it
Yep.
doesn't work. In
doesn't
my
work.
experience, it doesn't work.
I completely agree. I saw that, people tried all these things. When I returned to Imagineering, fortunately, Bob Iger had already said the 4-day. And I'll tell you, most Imagineers are there Fridays as well, because it's only Monday through.
Yeah.
But it's very true. And you know what it is for me? There is absolutely in the room and the whiteboard and the iteration and all this kind of stuff. And just being able to look back. But it's the after. It's the going to get a cup of coffee or seeing the person in the
Exactly.
hall later or saying, wait, I have one more thought. When you click off a Zoom, it's over.
Life ceases to exist.
That has ceased to exist
exactly.
in a way that doesn't have there's I don't know what it is, like a sustaining echo or something of the meeting when you don't actually just click, bye everybody.
No, it's an abstraction, and it can be
Maybe
done
that's what it
better.
is. It's
And
an
we've
abstraction.
designed better video conferencing technologies and so forth. We designed a system Sony was interested in, and then Sony decided to get out of that business. We still do something with it someday, but it maintains eye contact and directional of sound and voice. And it turns out eye contact matters. You got a million
God.
years of
Yeah.
genetic history that says,
Yeah.
if you don't think it matters, next time a pit bull stares, stare at it and see if it notices.
You are so right.
But the reality is, it's multidimensional and it's complex. I mean, research has shown that in a typical meeting, 80% of the communication is nonverbal. It's intonation, it's body language, it's gesture, it's this person speaking. Are the other people that work with them in the room rolling their eyes, or are they right there, or are they getting excited? That's all part of the dynamics. And when you're doing creative ideation, brainstorming, whatever you want to call it, that stuff is critical. It's not just useful, it's critical to getting a reasonable outcome. These are hard businesses. And while on one level I tell people, don't treat all your ideas as precious, just get on to the next one. The fact is, they are precious.
Yeah, I know.
And
That's true.
they're especially precious if you don't have any.
Yep.
And so, the key is, how do you create the environment, the people, the setting that's civilized, pleasant, fun for people? It can be intensive, it can be challenging, it can be all of those things, but it has to have a level of emotional, intellectual, and aesthetic stimulation that doesn't happen well when you spread it over distance.
It's absolutely true. And I think, too, the other weird thing, and you're right, I think there's nothing replaces physically being, but there are telepresence systems that have
Which can
worked.
be better, rather than worse.
Talking over each other is important. The quality of the voice, the eye contact is true. We also don't. I also noticed. It took me a while to figure this out, but seeing yourself is incredibly distracting. It's almost
Exactly. Oh, look,
you almost
I
can't.
have a hair coming out of my ear.
Yeah, you almost can't. Oh, good Lord, how much neck surgery is being done now by people? But it's sort of like you almost can't distance yourself from yourself to just float in that place where you have ideas. If you're constantly going, oh, that's what I look like. That's it's almost like when you hear your recording of your voice the first time.
Exactly. Well, it's just like when you start working in the film business, the first thing you learn is, if you're going to be on the set, stay out of the eye line of the actors, because all they have to do is, glance over, and you've ruined a take just by being there. Because eye contact is powerful. It's a connection. And in the case of being on a film crew, it's a connection where you don't want any connection. You're supposed to be invisible. So speaking of ideations and new things and all of that, what's your bet on the Sphere?
So fascinating. Well, I'm dying to go see it. I have a feeling the exterior is going to remain more interesting than the interior as a piece of marketing art piece. You know
It's
what I mean?
impressive.
That's impressive. I only saw videos of the shows. There are a lot of people who went. I'm intrigued by the audio that makes it pleasant for everybody and targeted.
Especially if it does.
If it really does, I'm very, everybody I know isn't an expert enough to actually judge it, in my opinion. The volume of the space, what I like about, I have no idea, the business model seems odd to me, but Vegas, there is no business model really.
Yeah, but it's hard to imagine how you take, 16,500.
They say they can get up to 18.5 if they use the floor.
So 18.5, how many acts can fill 18.5? What's the production cost?
It's going to
What's
be
the staffing? What's the operational cost? And they will have like 2.4 billion or something.
yeah,
And
2.3 billion in
Right.
investment that we know of. We all know there's
exactly.
another number.
So, as an outsider, I'm optimistic for them, but I don't get the business model.
I think the business model, it's almost like I felt like at first I thought we were going to hear it was some loss leader to get people to go to Vegas because everybody just knows it's about gambling. But I'm not sure because it doesn't sound like it. I think it's actually less about the band and the music, and it's more about whoever the artists who are going to use that volume.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's going to be the real, to me, it's like, oh, who cares who's got, like, Harry Styles is next. Who cares? Who's doing that?
Right.
That to me becomes
but
interesting.
I do think
I don't know how you make money though.
and again, how many 18,000
Yeah.
seat loads are there for any act?
Yeah.
And if there isn't an act, what are you willing to pay to go see this extravaganza, irrespective of how impressive it is?
Oh, I agree.
And so, like I say, it's when you see, well, New York, what's an experience that could run for a long time doing? Well, it's one thing if it's running in a 200-seat theater or a 300-seat theater, but 18,000, and again, this is an expensive piece of real estate. The operating cost, air conditioning that dome. I mean, you add up
No, I hadn't even thought about air conditioning.
all of that. This
alone.
is Vegas,
That alone.
And by the way, the
Climate change.
LEDs are hot.
Yes.
They generate heat, and that's a lot of, so you add all of that together, and I say, I'll just be congratulations to them, and fascinating if they can make that business model work.
Yeah, it's also, and thank you for having done it. Now, I will say, and by the way, I did hear the economics don't work for the 25 because U2's doing 25 shows, but they took most of the money.
Yeah, what a surprise.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
After expenses.
but again, the issue is if you start with the assumption that you need stars to fill it, which is the assumption for every venue there is, right? I mean, with few exceptions, doesn't matter if it's a sports team or anything else. Most of them want to get paid.
Well,
and these artist fees are not insubstantial for an act of the magnitude that will attract those kind of crowds.
Completely. And then you look at the big stars, like Taylor Swift doesn't need a giant dome to draw God knows how much money people spend for her, and she can just go on a box and make that kind of money. So it's going to be, that's where I'm going to be intrigued to see it. Now, I did go see, have you seen the ABBA show in London? That is impressive. Now, it makes sense because it's sort of evergreen. The performers, there's a few smattering of studio musicians who can swap out all day long. But here your stars are virtual and preserved. It's very effective. They did a great job. You should go because
I would enjoy
the lighting and everything.
I was getting ready to go to London and then bed bugs. Oh, look, it's a daughter. Come say hello, sweetheart.
Hello. How are you?
Hit and run.
But the ABBA show, well, we're seeing. That one I feel nailed it because it can sit there. You know what I mean? And your
it's
actors,
the right mix of
no one gets
broad
sick.
appeal and this. Exactly.
And it's one of those too where I wasn't particularly an ABBA fan, but it doesn't matter because you sit there and you go, these are fun songs. I mean, it's a fun concert.
People love to go places together for shared positive experiences.
I agree.
And I think one of the great things about Disney, I remember I got, I don't know if you did, but I got a fair amount of flack of people. How could you go to Disney? There's so many other things you could be doing, and all of that. And, my view is creating lifelong positive experiences for people is not such a terrible thing to do.
I think it's a very noble thing. And again, having a 7-year hiatus and then coming back, and I always find you just watch the guests watching a Disney parade because you see the kids just like, it's like, some holiday morning where they can't believe this character's coming and it's right there in front of them. And then the adults feel like heroes because their kids get this.
Exactly.
It's amazing.
It's great. So now, what brought you back? So we had you out, and then
so what brought me back
phone
was
rings,
and the argument that brought me because I had a great challenge with Airbnb, working.
We never talked about what were you doing.
Yeah,
there?
so Brian Chesky, Catherine Powell, who worked at Disney, went there and became an executive. That's how I met Brian. Brian was one of the co-founders and CEO. And so this was my Silicon Valley, my 18 months of working for a Silicon Valley company. Which was really interesting. What got me was, in talking to Brian, there's the homes business, this is where you stay. That's that. I had nothing to do with that. There's then what do you do? When you get there. So there is a small experiences business, they call it. So it's like you go stay here, then go do it. But Brian's goal was to create something so deeply authentic. You would be with a Parisian, you would get an authentic experience. It wouldn't be the tour guide, the big red bus or whatever, literally, and do things that were sort of off the beaten track, but you would leave there feeling like you had been hosted by a Parisian in a way. So very authentic experiences. He's obsessed with this idea that there's a loneliness epidemic and that getting people together in meaningful ways. And the experiences do bring, there's people who are traveling on business trips who are alone, there's families, there's people celebrating a birthday. So it's an interesting groups that come together for the experiences. And he wanted me to, so I had ideas to bring, there was all these small villages. The great advantage of the Airbnb model is not in cities, though that's where they make a lot of money, where there's hotels. It's in places you couldn't travel otherwise because there are no hotels or there's just crappy hotels. So you can stay in someone's home in a place you could never go to before. So that's the cool thing about it. And when it's hosted by the person, it's really great. So there's all these small villages throughout Europe, and we're working on one called Mirepoix outside Lyon. And it's an ancient medieval city. It was never affected by any wars. It's sitting there. And it's in walled city, and it's got a really dynamic arts culture also, but no one knows about it. So, and there's no one individual reason to go, but when you collected a bunch of experiences, so we were going to put villages on Airbnb, that kind of thing, and go and just be immersed with the locals, and you would know the locals, you'd have it's incredible. We did some experiments. So that was super exciting, and I found it was almost taking the immersive design of Disney and putting it in the real world.
Yeah.
Adventures by Disney kind of does it, but not really. And but I learned a lot about the difference between, as much as we both live in Hollywood for a reason, or LA for a reason. As much as we talk about it, it's an exciting. I like it. I like the entertainment industry, and it's fun. And everybody, at the end of the day, like you said, you're not curing cancer. You know what I mean? Although you're bringing joy. Silicon Valley is very different. Very short attention span. The average time anybody stays in one company is 3.7 years. They're usually jumping around because everybody wants to get promoted. The money is way out of scale. What did Michael Eisner make? $1 billion. Brian's worth $14 billion. He blew up an air mattress and made a company. He worked very hard for 14 years, but let's be serious. It's like, what? So, everybody was 40 years and younger. I was 55 when I started or something, and I was in the elders, the wisdom council because I was one of 5 people over 40. It was like, but that's a very different, extremely what people would call woke, which has advantages and disadvantages, and not thinking beyond 18 months as a vision 18 months was considered insanely long out, and I like 10, 20-year plans. So it was really fascinating. But the reason I came back, so I was very much embedded in that and having a great time actually. And because I believe you have to give something at least 3 years to see if you can plant the seed, and then 5, 7, whatever after. The main reason was both Bob Iger and Josh D'Amaro, who's the chairman of the Parks and Resorts, just said the Imagineering culture was severely wounded. And was sort of what used to be this bonfire of creativity was like smoldering embers. That was the call to action, was like, come back and rekindle the flame. So that, I said, okay, that sounds like something I want to do. I feel passion for that organization. It treated me very well, obviously. And I believe in it. It's a very unique, as you know, creative organization in the world. To hear that it was sort of fading off was just heartbreaking. So that's, and then 7 months in, fortunately, like I said, it's like seen in a movie where there's a little burning ember, you start fanning it, it comes back pretty quickly if it feels that, it's like an animal, like a puppy or a kitten. If you show it, you can be patient, the spirit is still in there and it comes back pretty quickly. But no one could figure out how to do it. So that's been the mission, is sort of, do that. So.
And you encouraged by the progress?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. And the great thing is, in the 7 years I was gone, all of the international parks I just finished a world tour. This is what I love about this product is mainland China, France, Hong Kong, Japan. The guests act the same with deep enthusiasm. Actually, I would say even more ownership than the domestic, than Americans. Just how much they love the product, and so when you see that, you're like, okay, this is going to be fun. We're going to be able to bring this to more mass audiences, and especially in places where you wouldn't think. And, as an American, you wouldn't think maybe communist China wouldn't want to resonate the same way. At the end of the day, you learn everybody's got the same desires to be happy and have fun and escape, And it turns out a mouse and chipmunks can actually bring it to...
Who knew? Exactly.
It's like really weird.
So once you get the culture back on track and all of that, what do you think are your big challenges coming up?
It's going to be more efficiency. How we get... It's not cost cutting. It's going to be more value for the investment, and I think that comes across in a few ways. Obviously, there's the low hanging fruit and obvious thing of just like stretch every dollar to get more product, but there's also how we do it. What kind of products? What kind? Recognizing. Look, augmented reality is. I mean, how soon do you think we're going to be? Glasses, that we're wearing that's just going to be more convenient to experience the world 3 years, I don't know, 4 years.
Well, the point is, every time you walk by, sweetheart, you have different clothing on. Yeah. I think here's the problem. The hardware technology still sucks.
Yep.
And so it's either ugly or it's heavy and ugly, or, the resolution isn't enough or the field of view isn't enough and so forth. So as soon as it becomes as good as a pair of sunglasses or a contact lens, there's, I think, a lot of potential for it, but we're not close to that yet.
You don't think we're that close?
I don't think we're that close. Yeah. And I would love to be proven wrong. Show me this.
Is the limiting factor the amount of like CPU or something that you need to have on your body?
It's, do you want it to be freely tethered? Are you willing to have like some cable coming down your ear and into your pocket?
Probably.
If I'm cueing someone, is a field of view this wide enough? I have a 140 degree wide field of view, and so if I look at this, I'm saying, well, that would be a nice vertical, and this would be a nice horizontal. Nothing close to doing that at the moment.
Right.
So you say, well, could you deal with a window? So you're saying basically you want to put a computer monitor, a TV screen, and
a heads-up display,
hold it in front of me and walk around. And so you can imagine for some things that would be fine.
Yeah.
But then you say, well, wouldn't it be great to read a street sign and be able to read it in a different language? And the answer is yes. How much better is it to do that than to hold your phone up and see the same thing?
Sure.
I think the issue for me is when it gets good enough so that it is transparent technology that you don't think twice about. People learn to accommodate cell phones into their lives fairly quickly, and then smartphones into their lives, and then bigger ones, and then tablets. But it has to be that good at doing its job before people do it.
Yeah.
I look at the Apple product, which I haven't seen live, and I don't think a lot of people are going to want to wear helmets,
No, that's for sure.
In their home.
I
Now,
agree with
again, inveterate gamers, et cetera, I'm sure there are people who do. Do I want to wear some big, weird thing? Probably not. So I think it's going to vary based on the customer. I saw years ago a contact lens prototype, which actually does imaging and stuff, not close for a practical point of view. So I think at the moment, it's still in the broad category of a solution for which there's no corresponding problem.
Right.
I think a lot of AR will get done by mobile devices. So it's not AR in the goggle sense or in that, and people will find their way and see which apps people really like and work with it.
That makes sense.
So, my sense is I don't think it's that close. Would be delighted to be surprised and see that something else. I mean, I think companies like Magic Leap and folks have done interesting technology developmental efforts. But is it a product yet that you want to buy and have all the time? Probably not.
Probably not. Yeah, I think for us, the other thing that is sort of a challenge in an interesting way is with the loss of the the way that people consume the longer format media. So, Disney was always great at, I always say, installing the software in the movie or the Disney Channel. Disney Channel was great because parents trusted nothing bad could happen, not even the commercials. I can plop my kid down in front of it. Now it's YouTube. That's where they do that. And
TikTok.
TikTok. We don't own YouTube but TikTok, so
Yep.
they see whatever. They'll see Minions as well as they could see a Disney thing. Movies aren't working as hard. We'll see what happens over time with that. And then streaming is like it's up against TikTok and YouTube. It's just there's too many people come and go, and there's no real loyalty to it. So we're finding with, especially in Asia and international markets, the early adoption where you're not able to sort of ring fence them in your own thing. They're just as in love with Mario or some other brand or anime in Japan as they are with Disney. And so the parks are now carrying the load of this is the Disney brand.
And I think people are wanting multi-dimensional experiences. I think years ago, latching onto a specific character or set of characters would satisfy people. I don't think it satisfies them now.
No, I think
they're
you're
in
right.
kind of gaming mode, or they're in this mode, or they're in that mode, and they'll have different associations emotionally with different types of characters and different experiences. Also, I think that virtualized shared experiences play a big part because they're spending their time like this with their friends, looking at things, sharing it. And so I think that that notion of how are you going to either get them and their friends into your world, or how are you going to, do the opposite, becomes important.
Yeah.
And I think that nobody's really figured that out yet. I think the good news is there will be ways to figure it out, and there's a lot of degrees of freedom. But the traditional notion that we will own a channel, that we will own a network, that we will own a portal or a gateway, that was okay 20 years ago and maybe 10 years ago, but it's not okay now.
Yeah, I agree. Where do you think, I'm excited about the future of generative AI, whatever, it's all over the place. I'm actually excited to me, it's yet another tool. It's sort of akin to the synthesizer, where suddenly a Hans Zimmer could do a whole score, you know what I mean? And it didn't put musicians out of, because he would, use them in different ways and enhance it. But
certainly didn't put Hans out of work.
Boy, he's a machine. What are your thoughts on generative AI? I mean, and all this kind of stuff, because it seems very promising for a lot of good.
I think it's promising for many things. Most of it will be crap, as most new solutions to problems are. And so I think we're going to go through a shakeout period where everybody figures out what's good, what works for them, what works for given applications. Do I have long-term concerns about AI? Lots of them. I have, concerns about the impact on news and truth.
Yeah,
The idea that if you wanted to fake a person saying something that wasn't real, 20 years ago, it was a whole team of top people working, and they might be able to do it. Now it's an app, and, you click that. So what is this?
It's crazy.
In a time where I would argue that in journalism, truth is at a position of jeopardy.
Yeah.
Where, we have entire channels and other things where people are lying, and everybody seems to think that's fine, or enough people seem to think it's fine that it continues. So what happens when you empower that with AI? Not good, probably.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think, as with all new technologies, there will be upside and great things about it and new creative options. Will it inspire creative people? Can it cause people who are, nascent, basically a latent creative who will blossom when they see the empowerment? For some, I'm sure that's the case. So again, I look at it as the introduction of both a new tool, and that new tool can enable new art forms and such. And so I think that's quite exciting.
Yeah.
Having said that, all these things, when handled without a sense of responsibility of consequences, can be challenging and can be an issue. When it comes to creating art, I can make this look like a Degas or a Monet or a Picasso. so what?
Right.
That's to me not interesting.
Yeah.
That ability to emulate, show me the new Monet or show me the other stuff. And I've seen no evidence of that yet.
No, not so far. No.
But, maybe it's there and we just haven't seen it yet. So I think it's an interesting tool. I think, for the same reason when Photoshop came out,
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, this became a very empowering thing.
Yeah.
In the early stages, it, might have been nice for spotting dust, and then it became a creative tool. So I think that promising, interesting, you can't stop it. I think there need to be discussions among computer scientists, developers, startups about what are your ethical and moral responsibilities
Yeah.
in birthing these tools and introducing them to the marketplaces and how they're used. I think the laws, copyright law, a whole bunch of other things, don't adequately deal with these things. No. So there's a lot of thinking that has to go on at the same time that these technologies mature. And it's not just one, it's 100 technologies that are all overlapping in a way that when it really clicks will provide some really exciting opportunities. I think that, you're seeing this first wave of concern with the writer's strike and the actors of sort of saying, well, is it fair that I show up and get paid for one day and then what's created with my persona is going to live and make billions for people for that? Well, I think most people wouldn't have trouble, except maybe an isolated studio executive, looking at that and say, well, there's a point there.
There is a point there, yeah.
So I think that's the question of how do you sort through these issues? It takes time, but it also takes a community of people who have a sense of what their responsibility is in making this work. Yeah. In some cases, I think that's present. In many cases, I think it's not present. And in the cases where it's absent, we need to educate people. And if educating people doesn't work, you have to regulate it because you don't have much choice. How effectively you can regulate it, that's a whole other discussion.
Right.
But if you use generative AI to ruin someone's life, should that be fair game and without consequences, or should there be consequences? Right now, if you do it as a malicious individual, there are a variety of remedies that people who've had their life ruined could go through it. If an AI ruins your life, who are you planning to sue and go after? So that's obviously an extreme case.
Yeah, but still.
But it ought to be of real concern to people.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, are you concerned about? Are young people concerned about having their name out there? Are they concerned about what Google, Microsoft, Apple know about you and how responsibly they're dealing with that data? Are you clicking OK for cookies, or not? And so, I think the problem is sometimes generational, sometimes experiential, sometimes until a person has their identity stolen or something else, they don't take passwords seriously. So I think, all this is new. Alan Kay makes a point, and he made this starting 25, 30 years ago. And he taught a course on it, which is basically saying the computer revolution hasn't begun yet. It still hasn't begun. So if you look at all this stuff and think it's the computer revolution, it's the first ripple in the water.
Interesting. I hadn't heard that.
Before the tsunami has arrived. So, we're at the beach, a nice day. Gee, the water's going out a little. I wonder what that means. We're at the water's going out stage. And it's just like if, right now we drove down to the beach to see the sunset. It's pretty. You see the waves breaking. You see seagulls. You can lament the microplastics. You can thrive on the water and the clarity and look at the plankton glowing at night. You have a whole bunch of experiences, but it gives you no sense of this system we call the oceans.
Sure.
Right? I can only see, dozen miles, depending how tall I am, out to the ocean. It doesn't give you any idea of what that is. And so I think that's where we are with all of this.
How fascinating.
And some of it is, with generative AI, the water's barely started to move out.
Oh, yeah.
When it comes to personal identity and theft, a lot of people are starting to see this big thing out there heading towards us. But you learn, and you learn by mistakes, and you learn by that. My concern is, how do we get social consciousness and awareness so that people take ownership and have a responsibility, rather than saying, well, I'm developing this software, but it's really someone else's problem to think about how to use it and all. It's all of our problems. And I think the sooner we get around to that, for the same reason, you have a theme park, you're responsible for people's safety there.
Yeah.
And whether it's mechanical safety or who's in the theme park,
Yeah,
or
totally.
what they're allowed to do, you can't just say, well, this is someone else's problem. We don't do this. We just do things that make noises and do the rest of it. So I think it's early days. I think it's essential for outfits such as yours or ours to be learning and experimenting.
Yeah.
I think it's essential to have a creative dialogue going on about this stuff, including what the implications are. I've never seen it work in technology that the answer is just don't work on it because it's too dangerous.
No, that's not going to.
That doesn't work. So long-winded answer, but I think
No. And look, at the very base level, I think the early iterative process can be greatly enhanced because, as we know, you want to do all your tough work before you start pouring cement and steel, and
a lot cheaper.
A lot cheaper. I always say if someone said, what's the worst sound you could hear, I said the jackhammer. We don't want to hear jackhammer, but
and it happens.
Delete and erase is fine. But I do think that early on, just to quickly get concepts turned around and visuals done and concept estimating and just be able to sort of manipulate that stuff is going to be a huge advantage at a very base level. But there's so many other things.
Yeah, it's tools, and having tools that help you do the creative job by taking some of the drudgery out of it, because a lot of it's drudgery. I mean, the reality is you design something, okay, what's it going to cost to do? Going through that feasibility is a lot of work.
There's these parametric estimates that are, basically you're using comparables that were already flawed, and so you're taking the flaws of that and using that to build the next one, and it just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of like.
And mistakes are expensive.
Very expensive. The days of when I left, it was hundreds of millions, and now everything is a B.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. Like an e-ticket is billions, and you're like, what? We did whole lands for $1 billion. So it's just what happens over time. But I do feel like, and I want to actually, I don't know if there's a place I can read or hear Alan's thing, because I love that notion of we're just the tip of the iceberg of this whole computer. The impact of
I say that was
so fascinating
UCLA
to me.
course.
I think
on
most
that.
people think it's like,
well, that's it.
We've experienced it.
They think they're in the middle of it, or it's all that. Hasn't begun.
That's incredible. That's incredible. I guess Jim Cameron would agree.
If you think it's
based on his
exciting,
visions.
fasten your seatbelts.
Well, I like that. But I do feel with this moment, there's something about the generative AI that maybe it's just because of it touches so many different things. It does feel like a significant moment, though, right? Mm-hmm. Of where whatever the age of computers is going to be called, or whatever it is sort of surfacing in a way that's like, oh shit, there is a Pandora's box.
Better pay attention.
Yeah,
now.
It's like, wow.
Exactly. So, what makes you happy?
That changes as life goes, right? These days, it is literally the confluence of I just love what I do every day. I do not wake up. People are always like Mondays. I'm like, I look forward to Mondays. I work all weekend. I've managed to really weave together. I like where I live. I like who I work with. I like what I work on. And it's all woven together. I tend to hang out with the same people that I work with. There's no, it's all, and that could be messy, but it's not. For me, it's just all one big blur of like a enjoyable thing. And then I am, to your very point of, travel is always one of the things that I find very nurturing and exhilarating, and COVID really put a wrinkle in that, and we took windows, but it's not as fluid as it should be. So I'm looking forward to that coming back in a much more, whether it just be the flights and just the hassles that, it used to be sort of a no-brainer, just go visit a place.
Sure.
If you could afford it. And that's, I want that back as well. So, but no, I just sort of, I'm enjoying, I have my dogs, and it's interesting. I think when you're younger, there's always this, for many people anyway, and I had a bit of it of like, what's next, what's next? And I did a bunch of next, and now I've sort of, it's weird going back to something in a new way. And I don't worry about what's next. And maybe it's watching my parents pass and all this kind of stuff too gives you a different focus.
Yeah, perspective.
Yeah, and it's sort of, but I find it very relaxing in a weird way. It's sort of like, it's not hard to enjoy a day anymore. You know, it's like.
Sounds like progress.
Yeah, and I was like, and I didn't realize, it's almost like you said, almost like 20/20 hindsight of, was it a good career or good, you know, whatever, good decisions. It's almost like, you know, God, I actually was putting more anxiety on myself than necessary. It's like, you know, I would go back and tell myself.
Getting that perspective is useful.
Yeah, it really is.
Because it gives you a new platform to build upon.
Yeah, it's great, you know. So, and I think what you're doing with this is great because anything that can sort of maybe, you know, if even 15% of things can be passed on to someone.
You can give people a thought or a different way of looking at the same problem or a way to get unstuck.
Yeah,
couldn't hurt.
And that's a big thing. The getting unstuck is a huge thing. A lot of people get stuck.
Yeah, and you know, it's learning how to build your own toolkit that lets you work through these issues, I think is pretty fundamental.
Right, and not just jump right to the pharmaceuticals.
Exactly.
Too many people do that these days.
Well, on that note, Bruce, thank you so much for coming in.
Great, no, my pleasure. This was fun. This was great.
Are we going to roll it now?
Oh, shit. Well, I figured one of them must be on.